The Greeks. Did you hear that? They've come. Probably not those good Greek-speaking Judeans, the Hellenists, as we may know them, but the Greeks, Gentiles, pagans, strangers from across the cultural and ethnic divide, outsiders, others. And now, here they come, and they're trying to get in to see Jesus. You know, the Greeks are here. Granted, it's possible that these are those good Greek-speaking Judeans, those who, while not necessarily speaking our language, still look and think and believe and behave much like we do, and who share our values and view of the world. Translated for certain Americans, those are the Norwegians, the Swedes, some Germans, Danes, and Finns. On the other hand, it's also possible, and even more likely, I think, that these Greeks who have come are Gentiles, pagans, unknowns who have come from across the cultural, ethnic, and religious border. These are outsiders. They are others. And not only do they not talk like us, they don't look like most of us. And we're not sure that they think or believe or behave like we do, and we're not yet convinced that they share our values or our worldview. They are folks that we identify as somehow fundamentally different from us. Folks we might treat with contempt or suspicion. Folks that we prefer to keep at an arm's length at least. Folks that we might prefer not be here among us based on our stereotypes or our prejudices, grounded usually in fear or ignorance. Translated for certain Americans in perhaps another generation and in other cities, towns, or neighborhoods, these are the Irish and the Italians and some Germans and the Chinese. Today, for certain folks, these are the Mexicans, the Syrians, the Russians, the Iraqis, and maybe the Buckeyes. And now these strangers, these others, these Greeks have come to see Jesus. Outsiders seek to cross the border and become insiders among us. What difference does it make if we think and speak of them not as Greeks or Mexicans or Russians or Iraqis, but as people who speak Greek, or as neighbors who have emigrated from Mexico, or as people whose ancestors were from Russia, or refugees who have come seeking asylum from Iraq, or even, dare I say it, people from Ohio. Today we are kicking off our congregation's work this year with the Valparaiso Men's Overnight Shelter. With whom are we in ministry? The homeless? Homeless men? Or are we in ministry with men? Folks like you or me who just happen to be living with homelessness. What difference does our language make? Let's try something. When I say the homeless or homeless men, what comes to mind? What do you see? How do you feel? What image is dancing around in your mind? maybe you feel sad or angry or defeated or a little bit disgusted. Maybe you think that their homelessness is their problem of their own making, and that there is nothing to be done to help the homeless because, they choose that lifestyle. But now what happens when I say men living with homelessness? Who comes to mind? Whom do you see? How do they make you feel? How do you react when someone is described as experiencing homelessness? My guess is that your response is a little bit different. Someone experiencing homelessness just sounds like a person who needs some help to fix a problem that they have for the moment. Let me suggest that when we speak of the homeless, as most of us do, and while it's more efficient, efficiency isn't everything, that when we speak of the homeless, what comes to mind are those nameless, faceless men and women and youth and children and veterans, those hopeless or hapless ones who live in the shadows and who make up the statistics in our social program proposals, those who live right here in Valpo, but who ordinarily fly just under most people's radar. Do you see them? They're here. Do you know them? The homeless suffer from negative stereotypes even among us. We think we know what they are. The homeless, we think, are all lazy, or they're alcoholics, or they're drug addicts, or they're unskilled, or they're all criminals, or they're mentally ill, or they're all no good beggars who won't work, or they're abusers. They're all dangerous to us and to our children. Their homelessness is a consequence of their bad choices. Really? They are those for whom homeless is for us their defining characteristic. It is, after all, the word that we use first, as in homeless men. But what happens when we speak instead about men? Folks like you and me, who happen to be in this moment experiencing homelessness. What happens when we speak about those who are defined first by their humanity, their personhood, which they share with us and with all of God's children? What happens when we speak about those who are sons and fathers, husbands, brothers, our friends, and our neighbors? What happens when we speak about those who have names? Michael, Aaron, Ray, Mark, Jason, Steve, Ron, Thomas, Roger, Pat, Corey, Charles, Eric, John, Pat, and Matthew. And they happen to be experiencing homelessness at the moment. Or what happens when we speak about those who work jobs in our community, in retail and bakeries, in grocery stores, restaurants, and in manufacturing, as painters and landscapers, as mechanics and truck drivers? Others of them do not have jobs at the moment, but they are not unemployed homeless men. They are men, sons and fathers, husbands, brothers, friends, and neighbors with names. And today they struggle with a compound problem, struggling not only with homelessness, but also with unemployment or underemployment. And this care and concern about the language we use is something more than simply political correctness. This isn't just about semantics. We're not simply playing word games here. The words we use to describe people powerfully affect our attitudes and the assumptions that we make about them. The words we use make a difference for how we think and how we feel, how we consider and respond to others. Think about this. We no longer use language of disabled people, or worse, the disabled. As advocates for people with disabilities have learned, labels generate strong emotional reactions that can create barriers to understanding and can reinforce stereotypes. Instead, using what is called people-first language for people living with disabilities or people who are differently abled, that's a way to break down negative stereotypes and to promote the self-worth and self-respect of those individuals. Their personhood, our shared common humanity, is what comes first. And so today we also speak about patients living with cancer, not cancer patients. And we talk about children with autism, not the autistic. And we talk about people living with depression. And we speak of those who may be visually impaired or those who may be unable to speak. Or we may think and talk and encounter those who are in recovery. Or even people who are incarcerated, not prisoners. People experiencing homelessness. The men experiencing homelessness among us are worthy of the same consideration. But the stereotypes about the homeless can become impediments to our community's work to discover and implement effective solutions to end homelessness. Our negative labels get in the way of our ability meaningfully to address the real structural and societal causes of homelessness. The lack of affordable housing choices, such as affordable apartments or single-room occupancy units or temporary overnight shelters, and other social services that meet the needs of those who are experiencing homelessness now, such as access to behavioral and mental health care, or a living minimum wage, or racial biases. All these things can be obstacles that keep people from being able to afford a home right here in Valparaiso. More respectful language about homelessness can transform attitudes among us and lead us to positive action towards changes in our community. And there are efforts underway already to do just that. The practice of people-first language can be effective because it encourages us consciously to think of homelessness as a public issue to be addressed, as a social problem to be solved by all of us, rather than as a condition that defines the character and the worth of certain individuals. as we make ready for this year's participation in the Valparaiso Men's Overnight Shelter, let me encourage you to see those with whom we are in ministry not as homeless men, but for who they truly are, men. Folks like you and me, but who are, for the moment, experiencing homelessness. See them first for who they are, sons and fathers, husbands, brothers, friends, and neighbors, as beloved children of God, who happen to be at this time, for the moment in their lives, without a home. We who would follow Jesus, we who would be his disciples in the world, are called to follow him, to be obedient to him, and to hear the call of God to a life of service and caring, to serve any and to serve all in any need. That is at the heart of our Lenten disciplines of fasting and prayer and acts of love. In a word, the invitation of Lent is a call to sacrifice. It is our giving up or our going without during these 40 days, not so much for what these disciplines can do for us, but because of the needs of others. Because others need space and a place. Because others need prayer and care. Because others need time and goods with which to live. And here's the thing. Like the disciplines of Lent, this all takes practice. So regardless of how you might think of this ministry, regardless of the language you may choose to use, whether homeless men or men experiencing homelessness, whether you talk about Syrians or refugees seeking asylum from Syria, whether you talk about the Mexicans or about those neighbors who have emigrated from Mexico, finally, it doesn't really matter. Since in his death and resurrection, and at this table at which he himself is the host, and at whose invitation we gather once more to eat and to drink, Jesus draws all people to himself. Fed once more and nourished, may we bring forth the fruit of the Spirit for all who come wishing to see Jesus, for the life of the world. Amen.